The great hall was glowing under soft golden lights. The guests had arrived dressed in formal clothes, their faces filled with quiet respect. It was not just another royal event. Something about this day felt different. The crowd stood waiting, watching the large doors that led to the grand entrance. They knew Prince William and Princess Kate were about to walk in, but no one knew what was coming next. No one knew how deeply they would feel it. Prince William appeared first, tall and composed. He wore his royal uniform, every medal and button shining with pride. His steps were calm, steady, and strong. But behind that calm face, his heart held something heavy. The world always saw him as the future king, but today he was also a husband standing beside the woman who had silently carried so much. Then, the moment happened. Princess Kate entered the hall. There was something powerful in her silence. She wore a soft, elegant dress in a color that seemed to whisper instead of speak. Her eyes were gentle but full of emotion, as if she was holding something inside that words could never explain. She walked beside William slowly, not just with grace, but with meaning. Every step she took seemed to carry a memory, a weight, a quiet kind of strength. The crowd instantly stopped moving. Even the photographers, usually busy snapping pictures, paused. No one wanted to miss this. It wasn't just because she was beautiful. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be explained, only felt. And then, as she reached the center of the hall beside William, Kate lowered her head. She didn't say a word. She didn't make a grand gesture. She simply bowed her head quietly and softly, as if listening to a voice that only she could hear. In that single movement, the entire room changed. Silence spread like a wave, touching every corner. People felt something rise in their chests, a lump in the throat, a stinging in the eyes. A man in the front row reached for his handkerchief. A young girl watching with her mother whispered, "Mom, is she okay?" And her mother, with tears in her eyes, simply nodded and said, "She's just feeling something deep." Kate's head remained low. William stood beside her, looking at her not with worry but with full understanding. He didn't need to ask her what she felt. He already knew, because they had walked through everything together: the pressure of being royal, the loss of loved ones, the heavy expectations, the deep worry for their children, and the quiet storms the world would never know. Even the monarch, seated on the royal platform, slowly rose. No one had expected that. It was not in the plan. It was not in the schedule. But in that moment, even the king himself could feel the weight of what was happening. His rise was silent, but full of respect. And the people, royal staff, guests, and even guards, felt the same. Some had seen dozens of royal events in their life. They had seen crowns, speeches, music, and cheers. But this was something different. This was not made for the cameras. This was not made for tradition. This was real. There were no words, but everyone could feel what was being said. Kate's lowered head spoke of pain, of memory, of love, of loss. It spoke of her mother-in-law, Princess Diana, whose spirit seemed to walk beside her. It spoke of the late Queen Elizabeth, whose quiet strength Kate had always admired. And it spoke of herself, Catherine, the woman behind the crown, who had quietly held so much inside and still stood tall beside her husband. Outside the hall, people watched the screens showing the live event. A woman in a coat, standing in the cold, wiped tears from her eyes. "That's not just a princess," she said softly. "That's a mother, a wife, a woman who's been through things we'll never understand." On social media, comments began pouring in. "Her silence is louder than words. She's holding the nation's heart. This made me cry, and I don't know why." But they did know why. Because in that quiet gesture, just lowering her head beside her husband, Kate reminded the world of something we often forget. Royals are human. They feel. They carry pain. They remember those they've lost. They worry. They cry. And sometimes they bow their heads not just out of tradition but out of love. William gently touched her hand, Not for the cameras, not for show, but for comfort. He didn't pull her to move. He stood with her, with patience, with strength, with love. That one gesture, his hand lightly brushing hers, spoke just as deeply as her bowed head. It said, "I'm here." It said, "I see you." It said, "You don't have to carry this alone." Together they stood in silence for a few more seconds, though to everyone watching it felt like time had frozen. And then slowly Kate lifted her head again. Her eyes were moist, but she didn't break. Her face was calm, strong, and peaceful. The crowd, still silent, watched her with new eyes. They had always respected her as a royal, but now they saw her as something even greater, as a woman with deep heart, quiet power, and endless grace. The ceremony continued, but no one would forget that moment, not because it was part of the event, but because it became something greater, a real memory, a real feeling, a moment that shook every heart in the room. When the ceremony ended, people left the grand hall slowly. Many looked back one last time, as if they were leaving behind something they didn't want to forget. Some still had tears in their eyes. Others held their hands close to their chest. No one had expected to feel so deeply. What had happened was not written in any program. It wasn't announced. But it stayed in their hearts like a quiet whisper that refused to fade. Outside, the cold evening air wrapped around the crowd waiting, behind the gates. People who had been standing for hours didn't complain. They didn't talk loudly or cheer like they usually did. They were quiet, watching the doors, waiting to catch just one glimpse of William and Kate. There was something about tonight, something sacred, something real. Inside the palace walls, Kate stood near a tall window, her hands softly resting on the glass. The lights outside sparkled and the faint sound of the public filled the distance. But her mind was far away. She didn't see the cameras or the press or the glitter of the evening gowns. Her heart was still standing in that moment from earlier, where she had bowed her head, feeling every ounce of memory she had tried to carry in silence. William came beside her without a word. He knew her silence better than anyone. He didn't need to ask what she was thinking. He already knew, because he had been carrying the same feelings. All night she had held herself with grace, but he had seen it in her eyes. The way they softened, the way they filled, the way they looked at the floor like she was standing beside ghosts. "Saw you," he whispered gently. Kate turned her face toward him. "I didn't plan it," she said quietly. "It just happened. I felt everything, all at once." William nodded. "I know, I felt it too." She looked back out the window. "When I bowed my head, I saw her, Will. I saw your mom." Her voice broke just a little. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to make William step closer and wrap his arm around her. For a moment, they weren't the future king and queen. They were just a man and woman, both remembering the same person who had once walked those royal halls with her own quiet strength and kind heart. Princess Diana. Kate had never met Diana in real life, but she had felt her presence in every story, every photograph, every quiet word spoken by William when he thought no one else was listening. Diana had been gone for years, yet somehow she was still everywhere, in the eyes of her grandchildren, in the way William held Kate's hand, in the way the public looked at Kate, hoping to see even a small piece of the woman they had loved and lost. "She would have been proud of you," William said softly. "She would have been proud of us." Kate nodded, but the tears in her eyes were not just for Diana. They were for everything she had carried quietly, bravely. The pressure of being perfect, the worry of being watched every second, the private health battles she never spoke about, the long nights holding her children when the world outside screamed with noise and cameras. She had smiled through it all. But tonight, something inside her had finally spoken, not in words, but in silence. And the world had listened. Back in the crowd outside, a woman in her 60s stood holding a small photo. It was old and faded, an image of Princess Diana hugging a young William. She held it close to her heart. I came here for Diana, she told the man beside her, but I stayed for Kate. She reminds me so much of her, not because she tries, but because she's real, she feels, and she's not afraid to show it. In a quiet home across the city, a teenage girl sat on her bed watching the footage again. She had played the clip of Kate bowing her head at least 10 times. She's so strong, she whispered to herself. I want to be like her someday. The moment had gone viral across the world, but it wasn't trending because it was shocking or dramatic. It was trending because it was human, because it was true, because even in a world full of crowns and castles, sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is lower her head and let the world feel what she's feeling. Behind palace walls, Kate took a deep breath. William still stood beside her. The lights outside flickered, but inside there was only stillness. She placed a hand on her heart, then looked into William's eyes. Do you think people understood what it meant? They did, he said. They felt it. That's all that matters. Kate smiled softly, a real smile this time, not for the cameras, not for the press, just for him. And outside, a hush of wind moved through the crowd, as if the night itself had become part of the story. People would go home and try to explain what they saw. But some moments can't be explained. They can only be remembered. It was never about grand speeches or royal rules. It was about one quiet moment, when a future queen bowed her head beside her husband. When she showed the world that behind all the titles, there is a woman with a heart wide enough to carry a country's grief and still stand tall. That night, the world didn't just see royalty. They saw love. They saw loss. They saw strength in silence. And they saw a royal couple who had learned, through all life's storms, how to hold on to each other and never let go. The morning after the ceremony, the world was still speaking about the moment Kate bowed her head beside William. Newspapers didn't just show pictures. They tried to describe the emotion, but none could fully explain it. Headlines read, A. Future Queen's silent cry. The bow that broke the silence. Kate's quiet strength shakes the world. Yet even those words felt small, because the feeling people had was bigger than any headline. It had touched something deep inside them. Inside the palace, the air was quiet. Kate sat by the window, a soft cup of tea resting in her hands. She watched the sun rise over the London sky, but her thoughts were far from peaceful. She felt a heaviness in her heart, the kind that comes after letting the world see what's been hidden inside for so long. She had not planned to show her pain. She had not wanted to become the center of such strong attention. But in that moment, when she lowered her head beside William, she had let go. And the world had seen her soul. She was not ashamed of it. But it left her feeling exposed. William came into the room quietly. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply sat beside her. That had always been their way. Support without pressure. Presence without demand. Just knowing someone is there when words are too hard to say. You didn't just bow, William said gently, breaking the silence. You gave people something to feel. You let them see the real you. That's rare, Kate. That's brave. Kate looked at him with tired eyes, full of love but also full of questions. Was it too much? No, he said without a pause. It was just enough. People needed that. We needed that. The truth was, Kate had always felt the pressure of being the perfect royal. She smiled when she was expected to. She stood tall in heels when her feet ached. She waved, posed, and walked with grace even when her heart was heavy. And when she got home, when the lights turned off and the doors closed, she carried the weight of the world in silence. Few knew about the nights she cried quietly in bed, worried for her children, afraid for her health, tired from long days of pretending to be unbreakable. Few saw the quiet moments when she held her children just a little tighter, not wanting to let go. And no one, not even the public who loved her, truly understood the strength it took to live under a spotlight that never dimmed. But William knew. He had seen it all. He had seen her wipe away tears before walking out the palace door. He had seen her whisper to their children, "Mummy's okay." when she clearly wasn't. He had seen the courage behind her silence, and now the world had seen just a glimpse of that courage too. Across the country, stories kept pouring in. A nurse in Manchester shared, "When I saw her bow her head, I remembered the day I lost my mum." It felt like Kate was feeling it too. A soldier wrote, "Her silence hit harder than any speech I've heard. That's the kind of leader people follow." Even children felt it. A 12-year-old girl wrote a letter to the palace saying, "Princess, Kate, when you looked down, I saw that even strong people feel sad sometimes. It made me feel not so alone." It was moments like these that reminded Kate why she kept going. It wasn't for the crown or the fancy events. It was for the people, for the girl who lost her mum, for the mother fighting silent battles, for the elderly woman who still cried for Princess Diana, for all of them. Later that day, Kate and William went for a walk through the palace gardens. It was cold, but peaceful. The trees whispered in the wind, and the crunch of leaves under their feet filled the silence. They didn't speak much, but they didn't have to. Every step they took was in rhythm. It had always been that way. As they reached the small memorial fountain for Diana, they both stopped. Kate looked at the water, soft ripples moving under the winter sky. She reached out and touched the stone edge gently. "I didn't know her," she said quietly, "but I feel like I carry her with me. Every day." William's eyes grew soft. "You do. In the way you love, in the way you protect, in the way you let people see your heart." He paused, then added, "And she would have seen you last night and said, 'That's my daughter-in-law.' She would have been proud." Kate smiled through tears. It wasn't just Diana she had thought of during the bow. It was also her own journey, her health, her fears, her family. All the things she couldn't speak about in interviews or public speeches. That one moment, her bowed head, was her only chance to speak her truth without words. And somehow, the world had heard her. The sun was lower in the sky now, but the warmth between them never faded. They walked back toward the palace hand in hand. The world outside continued to speak of their moment. But for Kate, what mattered most was not the headlines or the praise. What mattered was that she had finally let herself be seen, not just as a royal, but as a woman with real emotions, deep strength, and endless love. And in doing that, she had given something powerful to everyone who had ever felt unseen. She had given them the courage to say, "I feel too, and that's okay." That was the real crown she wore that night, one made not of jewels but of grace. The moment was over, but its echo had just begun. Days passed since Kate's quiet bow beside William, but the world didn't move on. It held on to that memory like a fragile flower. People watched the moment again and again. They shared it, they wrote about it. But more than that, they felt it. Deep in their hearts, they remembered how they stopped what they were doing just to watch her lower her head in silence. No music, no words. Just a woman, standing beside her husband, letting her soul speak without sound. Inside royal circles, the reaction was not one of formality, but of feeling. Some officials who had served the palace for years said it was one of the most moving moments they had ever witnessed. One advisor, who rarely showed emotion, admitted he had to leave the hall quietly after the event. "It was like time stopped," he whispered. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was louder than any royal speech I've ever heard. Back inside the palace, Kate found herself receiving thousands of letters from strangers, women, children, veterans, widows, young girls, even hospital patients. Some wrote just a few lines, others poured their hearts onto pages. Many said the same thing. "You made me feel seen. You showed me it's okay to feel pain. I never cry, but I did that day." One letter came from a mother who had just lost her child. She wrote, "I didn't think anyone understood what grief looked like anymore. But when you bowed your head, I saw myself. And for the first time in weeks, I cried. Thank you." Kate read each letter slowly. She didn't rush. She kept some beside her bed. She carried one in her coat pocket. These weren't just fan letters. These were people's stories, and she felt honored to hold them. But while the world saw her as a quiet symbol of strength, Kate remained deeply human. Behind the palace walls, there were still moments when she closed the door and let her emotions come freely. Some nights, she would sit beside William without saying a word, her eyes filled with both pride and pain. Some days she would hold her children a little tighter. She had opened her heart to the world, but it didn't make her feel lighter. It just made her feel more connected. William became her quiet rock during those days. He never pushed her to be strong when she felt tired. He never asked her to smile when she wanted to cry. He simply stayed close. He reminded her with his silence that she didn't have to carry it all alone. One evening, they were invited to a small charity event. It was not grand, just a quiet visit to a center helping families in grief. Kate knew it would be emotional. As she stepped inside, a little boy came running up to her. He had lost his mother the year before. "Are you the princess?" he asked in a small voice. Kate bent down and smiled warmly. "Yes, I am." The boy looked at her with wide eyes and said, "You looked sad on the TV. Were you missing someone?" Kate's eyes softened. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied gently. "I was." The boy nodded. "Me too." And in that moment, without anyone else watching, she opened her arms. The boy stepped into her embrace, and for a long time they just stood there. No royal guard interrupted, no camera flashed. It was just two people, one small, one grown, who understood something that didn't need words. Afterward, as they left the center, Kate looked at William and said, "This is why it matters. Not the titles, not the clothes, but moments like that. That boy. He needed to feel he wasn't alone." William nodded. "And you gave him that, just by being real." The world continued on. But something had changed. People started talking about grief differently. They started speaking more about emotional strength. Schools used Kate's moment as an example of showing courage in gentle ways. Hospitals shared her story with patients who had lost loved ones. Even those who never followed the royal family before found themselves watching that clip, not for gossip, but for comfort. Kate had become more than a princess. She had become a symbol, not of perfection, but of presence. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday, Kate walked alone in the palace gardens. The wind was soft, the trees swayed gently. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you," as if speaking to those who had gone before her. Diana, the queen, those who had quietly shaped her path. She didn't need applause. She didn't need a crown. She had found something more powerful: connection. A connection built not through speeches but through silence, through showing her tears, not hiding them, through letting the world know that even those with crowns can carry pain. Kate's story was no longer just about being a royal. It was about being human. And that one quiet moment when she bowed her head beside William had given the world a glimpse of something rare, something true. It wasn't just a royal memory. It became everyone's moment, a moment that reminded people it's okay to feel. It's okay to bow your head when your heart is heavy. It's okay to be both strong and soft at the same time. That moment didn't just shake hearts, it healed them.